The sledgehammer felt heavy in David's hands as he stared at the sparkling pool that had been his family's joy for 3 summers. Behind him, Karen Martinez stood with her arms crossed, a triumphant smile playing on her lips as she held up the freshly printed HOA violation notice. 24 hours, she said coldly. Or we'll do it for you. But what Karen didn't know was that David had just discovered something buried in the HOA archives, something that would turn her perfect little kingdom upside down. As the first swing of the hammer cracked the pristine tile, David whispered, "You have no idea what you've just started." David Chen stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug trembling in his grip, watching his 8-year-old daughter Emma perform her morning ritual of checking the pool temperature. The thermometer bobbed in the crystal clear water as she knelt on the deck, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Daddy, it's perfect," she called out, her voice carrying the pure excitement that only summer vacation could bring. "Can we have the pool party today? Please." The irony twisted like a knife in David's chest. Today was supposed to be Emma's birthday pool party. 12 kids, 3 pizzas, and enough pool noodles to stock a small army. Instead, he'd spent the last hour making cancellation calls, each one breaking his heart a little more. "Maybe next weekend, sweetheart," he managed, his voice catching on a lie. The doorbell's sharp chime cut through the morning air like a judge's gavel. David didn't need to look to know who it was. Karen Martinez had a particular way of pressing the button, 2 quick jabs followed by a longer hold. As if the doorbell itself needed to understand her authority, he opened the door to find Karen standing on his porch in her signature power pose, shoulders back, clipboard clutched against her chest like armor, her perfectly styled auburn hair not moving despite the morning breeze. At 45, she'd mastered the art of looking both professional and predatory. "David." Her smile was all teeth, no warmth. "I trust you received my notice." Behind her stood 2 men David didn't recognize, one tall and lanky with a contractor's tan, the other shorter and stockier with demolition emblazoned across his t-shirt. They weren't here for conversation. "Karen, please. Can we talk about this reasonably? Emma's birthday is today, yes. I'm aware." Karen consulted her clipboard with theatrical precision. "Unfortunately, reasonable discussion ended 6 months ago when you first installed that structure without proper HOA approval. It's not a structure, it's a pool. And I did get approval. I have the paperwork." Karen's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You have approval from the previous board. My administration operates under a different set of standards. Standards that prioritize the community's collective vision over individual desires." The word vision rolled off her tongue like a religious incantation. Karen had been using it constantly since her election as HOA president 8 months ago, part of her campaign promise to restore Willowbrook Estates to its intended elegance. "This is insane," David said, his voice rising. "We've lived here for 4 years. The pool has been here for 3. No one complained until you. Mr. Patterson complained." Karen flipped through her clipboard. Mrs. Hendricks expressed concerns. The Johnsons found it visually disruptive to their morning meditation routine. Each name hit David like a physical blow. These were neighbors he'd barbecued with, people whose mail he'd collected during vacations, friends who'd complimented the pool's design when he'd first installed it. "I don't believe you." Karen's smile widened. "Belief is irrelevant. What matters is compliance." She gestured to the 2 men behind her. "This is Jake Morrison from Morrison Demolition, and his associate Tony. They're here to facilitate your cooperation." Jake stepped forward, his expression almost apologetic. "Look, buddy, I don't like this any more than you do. But a job's a job. You want to drain it yourself, or should we? You're not touching my pool." David's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Actually," Karen interjected, consulting her clipboard again, "according to Section 4.7 of the revised community bylaws, any non-compliant structure must be removed within 24 hours of formal notification. Since you received the notice yesterday at 3:47 p.m., that gives you." She made a show of checking her Apple Watch. "Approximately 6 hours and 13 minutes. "Emma." The voice came from behind David as his wife Sarah appeared in the doorway, their daughter's hand clasped tightly in hers. "Go upstairs and get ready for 4-hour day trip." Emma's face crumpled. "But what about my party? What about the pool?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah's eyes found David's, and he could see years of marriage compressed into that single look: trust, disappointment, and a desperate hope that somehow he could fix this. Karen, Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor David could hear beneath it. This is our daughter's 8th birthday. Whatever issues you have with us, surely they can wait one day. Karen's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened further. Mrs. Chen, I understand your disappointment. But rules exist for everyone's benefit. The community's aesthetic standards can't be compromised because of personal celebrations. Aesthetic standards. David's voice cracked with disbelief. It's a pool. It's not like I installed a neon sign or started a junkyard. Your pool disrupts the natural sightlines. It creates noise pollution during evening hours. And frankly, the blue water clashes with the community's earth tone palette. The absurdity of it all hit David like a wave. Earth tone palette? Karen, this is a neighborhood, not a magazine spread. Perhaps that's the difference between your vision and mine. Karen's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. I see potential. I see what Willowbrook Estates could become with proper guidance. You see, a place to indulge your immediate gratification. Jake shifted uncomfortably behind her. Maybe we could. No maybes, Karen snapped. Mr. Chen, you have until 3:47 this afternoon. If the pool isn't drained and removal hasn't begun, Morrison Demolition will handle it for you. The costs will be added to your HOA assessment, plus administrative fees. How much are we talking about? Sarah asked quietly. Karen consulted her clipboard one final time. Approximately $8,000. Plus penalties for non-compliance, of course. David felt the world tilt sideways. $8,000 they didn't have, for destroying something that had cost them $12,000 to install. The mathematics of Karen's tyranny were perfectly calculated. This is extortion, he whispered. This is community management. Karen turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and David? I've scheduled a community meeting for next Tuesday. We'll be discussing additional improvements to maintain our standards. I do hope you'll attend. The threat was unmistakable. David watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the sidewalk with metronomic precision. Jake lingered for a moment, his expression genuinely apologetic. Look, man, he said quietly, if it was up to me. But she's got all the paperwork. Everything's legal. Legal doesn't make it right, David replied. Jake nodded slowly. No, it doesn't. He handed David a business card. If you want to drain it yourself, call me. I'll walk you through it. Make sure you don't damage the foundation. No charge. After they left, David stood in his doorway, staring at the pool, where Emma had spent countless hours learning to swim, where she'd celebrated her last 2 birthdays, where she discovered the joy of underwater tea parties and the art of the perfect cannonball. Daddy. Emma's voice was small, uncertain. Are the mean people going to break our pool? David knelt down to her level, meeting her eyes. They were brown like his, but they held Sarah's unwavering strength. I don't know, sweetheart. But I promise you this, I'm going to fight for it. How? It was such a simple question, but David didn't have an answer. How do you fight a system designed to crush resistance? How do you battle someone who'd weaponized bureaucracy itself? I don't know yet, he admitted. But sometimes the best fights are the ones where you don't know how you're going to win. That afternoon, David sat in the Willowbrook Estates community office, a cramped room above the local coffee shop that served as HOA headquarters. The previous president, mild-mannered Jerry Patterson, had run meetings from his kitchen table. Karen had transformed the space into something resembling a war room. Filing cabinets lined every wall, a massive whiteboard covered in charts and timelines dominated one corner, and her desk sat positioned to face the door like a fortress. Mr. Chen. Karen didn't look up from her computer. I didn't expect to see you here. I want to see the original HOA documents, the founding covenants, the architectural guidelines, everything. Now she did look up, her eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. I beg your pardon. You keep talking about community vision and standards. I want to see what the original developers actually intended for this neighborhood. Karen's smile was indulgent, the way one might smile at a child asking to see Santa's workshop. The documents are quite extensive, David. I'm not sure you'd find them illuminating. Try me. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the desk. Finally, Karen shrugged and pointed to a filing cabinet in the corner. Founding documents are in the bottom drawer. Architectural guidelines are in the red binder. Community standards revisions are in the blue binder. David's pen. David's hand shook as he photographed the final page of the original development plan with his phone. The faded blueprint showed Lot 47, his lot, with a clear notation in the architect's careful script, recreational water feature, community. Focal point. The date stamp read March 15, 1987, and bore the signatures of the original developers, the City Planning Commission, and most importantly, the HOA's founding board. His pull wasn't violating the community vision. It was fulfilling it. Finding everything you need. Karen's voice cut through his concentration like a blade. David looked up to find her standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, watching him with the predatory stillness of a hawk eyeing a mouse. He'd been so absorbed in the documents that he hadn't heard her return from whatever power lunch had kept her away all afternoon. Actually, yes. David carefully closed the development plan, keeping his expression neutral. Very illuminating reading. Karen's eyes narrowed, tracking his movements as he returned the files to their proper places. I'm sure. Though I should mention, those documents are quite outdated. We've made substantial improvements to the community guidelines since then. I noticed some very creative interpretations. Progressive interpretations, Karen corrected, moving closer to her desk. This community was stagnating under the previous administration. Someone needed to have a vision for what we could become. David stood slowly, fighting the urge to confront her immediately. He needed time to plan, to understand exactly what he discovered and how to use it. Well, I should get home. Emma's still hoping for some kind of birthday celebration. About that. Karen's smile was sharp as winter wind. I took the liberty of calling Morrison Demolition. They'll be here at 7 tomorrow morning to begin removal. I thought an early start would minimize disruption to the neighborhood. The casual cruelty of it hit David like a physical blow. Not only was she destroying his daughter's birthday, she was making sure the demolition happened during Emma's favorite time of day, when she liked to sit by the pool with her cereal, feeding bits of toast to the goldfish they'd named Bubbles. That's very considerate of you. I thought so. Karen sat behind her desk, already turning back to her computer. Oh, and David? I'll need you to handle the permits for pool removal. The forms are quite complex, but I'm sure you'll manage. David paused at the door. Actually, Karen, I have a question about permits. Yes. Did you pull permits for your gazebo? The typing stopped. Karen's fingers froze over her keyboard, and for just a moment, David saw something flicker across her face. Not quite fear, but close enough. My gazebo was installed by the previous owners. It's been grandfathered in. Ah. David nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Grandfathering is such an important protection for property owners, isn't it? Prevents new boards from arbitrarily changing the rules and destroying people's investments. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, Karen's fingers resumed their clicking, but David noticed they weren't quite as steady as before. Have a pleasant evening, David. I'll see you tomorrow morning. David drove home in a daze, his mind racing through the implications of what he'd discovered. The original development plan was damning enough, but there had been other documents, minutes, from early board meetings, correspondence with the city, architectural surveys. Karen hadn't just exceeded her authority, she'd systematically violated the community's founding principles. But more than that, she'd made enemies. The meeting minutes revealed a pattern of steamrolling opposition, silencing dissent, and using technicalities to crush anyone who questioned her methods. David's pull wasn't her first target. It was just her most visible one. His phone rang as he pulled into his driveway. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. How did it go? She asked without preamble. Better than expected. Much better. David looked toward his house, where he could see Emma's silhouette in the kitchen window, probably helping Sarah prepare what she thought might be their pool's last supper. Sarah, what do you know about Jerry Patterson? The old HOA president? Nice man. Retired teacher. Why? I need to talk to him. Tonight, if possible. David, what's going on? You sound different. David smiled, feeling truly hopeful for the first time in 24 hours. I found something. Something that changes everything. Jerry Patterson lived 3 blocks away in a modest colonial that looked like it had been plucked from a Norman Rockwell painting. The man who answered the door matched the house perfectly. Rumpled cardigan, reading glasses perched on his head, and the patient expression of someone who'd spent 40 years teaching middle school science. David. What a pleasant surprise. Come in, come in. Jerry ushered him into a living room dominated by overflowing bookshelves and a massive jigsaw puzzle spread across a card table. Margaret, we have company. Margaret Patterson emerged from the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. David. How are you? How's that sweet little girl of yours? She's… Well, that's actually why I'm here. David accepted their offer of coffee and settled into a well-worn armchair. I need to ask you about the early days of the HOA. Specifically, about architectural approvals and the original development plans. Jerry's expression grew serious. This is about your pool, isn't it? Margaret, didn't I tell you this would happen? You did, Margaret replied sadly. We saw the demolition truck go by this afternoon. I wanted to call you, but Jerry said, I said it wasn't our business anymore, Jerry finished. But perhaps it is. He leaned forward, his hands clasped together. David, I need you to understand something. When I was president, our philosophy was simple. This is a neighborhood, not a dictatorship. People have a right to enjoy their homes. That's not Karen's philosophy. No, it certainly isn't. Jerry's voice carried decades of disappointment. When she ran for president, she seemed so organized, so passionate about improvement. I thought she'd be good for the community. What changed your mind? Jerry and Margaret exchanged a look that spoke of 30-year marriages and shared regrets. The Hendricks family, Margaret said quietly. You remember them? They lived in the blue house on Maple Street. David nodded. The Hendricks had moved away suddenly 6 months ago, leaving behind a house that still sat empty. They had a vegetable garden, Jerry continued. Beautiful thing, tomatoes, peppers, herbs. They'd been growing it for 8 years. Then Karen decided it violated the landscaping standards. She made them tear it out. Worse. Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. She claimed the irrigation was creating drainage issues, that the composting attracted rodents, that the garden was depreciating neighboring property values. She hit them with fines, forced them to hire lawyers, made their lives miserable for months. They spent their retirement savings fighting her, Jerry added. Finally gave up and moved to Florida to live with their daughter. 40 years in this neighborhood, and Karen drove them out over tomatoes. David felt a cold fury building in his chest. How many others? The Johnsons sold their house rather than remove their children's playset. The Morales family was forced to repaint their front door because Karen decided yellow was inconsistent with community aesthetics. The list goes on. Why didn't anyone stop her? Jerry's laugh was bitter. Have you tried to stop Karen Martinez? She's weaponized every bureaucratic tool at her disposal. She knows more about HOA law than most attorneys, and she's not afraid to use it. But the original guidelines don't matter to her. She's convinced the current board that we need to elevate the community, that the old standards were too lax. Jerry stood and walked to his window, staring out at the quiet street. She's turned neighbors against each other, David. People are afraid to improve their homes, afraid to plant flowers, afraid to let their children play too loudly. This used to be a place where families grew. Now it's a place where dreams come to die. David pulled out his phone and showed Jerry the photographs he'd taken. What if I told you she doesn't have the authority to do any of this? Jerry's eyes widened as he scrolled through the images. Dear God, is this the original development plan? Complete with architectural specifications. Jerry, my pool isn't just legal, it's exactly what the original developers intended. And there's more. For the next hour, David walked Jerry through everything he discovered. The grandfather clauses Karen had ignored, the community standard she'd arbitrarily changed, the permit she'd bypassed in her own property improvements. "This is incredible," Jerry breathed. "David, do you realize what this means?" "It means she's been operating outside her legal authority for months, maybe longer. It means every decision she's made, every fine she's levied, every family she's driven away, it's all invalid." Margaret appeared in the doorway, her eyes bright with something David hadn't seen since before Karen's reign of terror began: hope. "What do we do?" she asked. David looked at his watch. It was nearly 9 o'clock. In 10 hours, Morrison Demolition would arrive to destroy his daughter's birthday pool. But now he had something Karen didn't expect: the truth. "We fight back," he said simply. "All of us." Jerry smiled, the first genuine smile David had seen from him in months. "You know, I taught civics for 20 years. One thing I always told my students: tyrants only have power as long as people let them." "Are you suggesting what I—" At 5:47 a.m., David's backyard looked like a covert military operation. Neighbors emerged from the pre-dawn darkness carrying folding chairs, thermoses of coffee, and expressions of grim determination. Jerry Patterson had transformed from retired teacher to revolutionary general overnight, directing people to parking spots 3 blocks away and coordinating phone trees with the precision of someone planning D-Day. David stood by his pool, watching familiar faces gather in the growing light. There was Maria Santos from Elm Street, whose rose garden Karen had declared incompatible with drought-resistant landscaping standards. Bob Richardson arrived with his teenage son Kyle, both still angry about being forced to remove a basketball hoop that had been generating excessive noise during approved quiet hours. But it was the faces David didn't recognize that surprised him most. People he'd only waved to in passing had crawled out of bed before sunrise to stand in his backyard, united by a common enemy and, for the first time in months, a real chance at victory. 37 confirmed, Margaret Patterson whispered to David, consulting a handwritten list. Plus the Hendricks called from Florida. They're driving up for the confrontation. Confrontation. Jerry appeared at David's elbow, his normally mild demeanor replaced by something sharp and focused. "Oh yes, there's going to be a confrontation. Karen's expecting to arrive at 7 with her demolition crew to find you defeated and compliant. Instead, she's going to find this." He gestured to the growing crowd. Sarah emerged from their kitchen, carrying a tray of coffee cups, her face glowing with something David hadn't seen since Emma was born: fierce protective pride. "She doesn't know, does she?" Sarah asked quietly. "Not yet," David replied. "But she will soon." At exactly 6:15 a.m., a black sedan pulled up across the street. Through the windshield, David could see Karen Martinez talking animatedly on her phone, probably coordinating with the demolition crew. She hadn't noticed the unusual number of cars in the neighborhood yet. Jerry's parking strategy was working. "Places, everyone," Jerry announced in a stage whisper that carried surprising authority. The transformation was remarkable. 37. Neighbors melted into strategic positions around David's backyard like they'd been planning this for weeks instead of hours. Some took seats on the deck, others positioned themselves along the fence line, and a few brave souls stationed themselves near the gate where Karen would have to enter. Emma appeared in the sliding door, still in her frozen pajamas but wide awake with excitement. "Is it time for my birthday party?" she asked innocently. The entire gathering fell silent, struck by the simple truth of an 8-year-old's question. This wasn't just about HOA bylaws or property rights anymore. This was about a little girl's birthday pool party, and whether a community would stand together to protect it. "Yes, sweetheart," David said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "It's time for your party." At 7:02 a.m., the Morrison demolition truck rumbled around the corner, followed by Karen's pristine white BMW. David watched through his kitchen window as Karen stepped out of her car, clipboard in hand, ready to oversee the destruction of his family's happiness. She made it exactly 3 steps up his driveway before she noticed the first anomaly: Bob Richardson sitting calmly in a lawn chair beside the front gate, sipping coffee and reading a newspaper like he lived there. "Excuse me." Karen's voice carried the sharp edge of someone whose carefully planned morning had just hit an unexpected obstacle. "This is private property." "Yes," Bob replied without looking up from his paper. "David invited me." Karen's head swiveled, taking in the unusual number of cars lining the street, the soft murmur of conversation coming from the backyard, and the growing realization that something had gone very wrong with her script. Jake Morrison climbed down from his truck, looking uncomfortable. Should we wait? Or, no waiting, Karen snapped. We have a schedule to maintain. She marched toward David's front door with the determined stride of someone who'd bulldozed through resistance before and expected to do it again. David opened the door before she could knock. Karen, you're early. I'm punctual, she corrected, consulting her watch with theatrical precision. Demolition was scheduled for 7 a.m. sharp. Are you prepared to facilitate access to the backyard? Actually, I was hoping we could discuss this with the community first. You know, get everyone's input on your vision. Karen's eyes narrowed. Everyone. Why don't you come see for yourself? David led her through his house toward the sliding door that opened onto the deck. He could hear Karen's heels clicking against his hardwood floors with increasing agitation as the sound of voices grew louder. David, I don't know what you think you're. She stopped mid-sentence as they stepped onto the deck. 37 neighbors looked up at her with expressions ranging from polite expectation to barely contained fury. Jerry Patterson sat in the front row like a judge preparing to hear testimony. Margaret had positioned herself near the pool with a camera, documenting everything. Maria Santos held a thick folder that David recognized as copies of the documents he'd discovered yesterday. But it was Emma, standing beside her birthday pool in her frozen pajamas with a party hat perched on her head, that seemed to shake Karen most profoundly. What is this? Karen's voice had lost its commanding edge, replaced by something higher and more uncertain. It's a community meeting, Jerry replied calmly. Something we used to have regularly before you decided input was inefficient. This is highly irregular. Community meetings require proper notice, agenda distribution, quorum verification, like the meeting where you voted to change the architectural guidelines. Bob Richardson's voice cut across her protests. Because I don't remember getting notice for that one. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen's grip tightened. On her clipboard. I am the HOA president. I have the authority to make necessary improvements to community standards without consulting every individual. Actually, David interrupted, pulling out his phone, you don't. He projected the photograph of the original development plan onto a tablet screen that Sarah held up for everyone to see. The image was clear enough that even Karen could read the architect's notation from 20 feet away. This is the original development plan for Willowbrook Estates, filed with the City Planning Commission in 1987. As you can see, Lot 47, my lot, was specifically designated for a recreational water feature described as a community focal point. The silence was absolute. Even Jake Morrison had climbed down from his truck and was craning his neck to see the screen. Furthermore, David continued, advancing to the next image, the original HOA covenants include a grandfather clause protecting any improvement installed with board approval from future restrictions. My pool was approved by Jerry's board in 2021, which means your attempt to remove it violates the community's founding documents. Karen's face had gone white, but her voice remained steady. Those documents are outdated. The current board has the authority to revise standards as needed. Does it? Maria Santos stood up, opening her folder. Because according to the HOA bylaws, any revision to the architectural guidelines requires a 2/3 majority vote of the entire community. When exactly did that vote take place? And while we are asking questions, Bob Richardson added, did you pull permits for your gazebo renovation last spring? Because I've got the city records right here, and they're very interesting reading. David watched Karen's composure crack like ice under pressure. Her eyes darted from face to face, looking for allies and finding none. Even Jake Morrison was studying his boots with the uncomfortable expression of someone who'd realized he'd been hired to demolish a perfectly legal structure. This is ambush, Karen said finally. A coordinated attack on legitimate authority. No, Jerry Patterson stood slowly, his teacher's voice carrying clearly across the backyard. This is democracy. The word hung in the air like a bell that had been struck. David looked around at his neighbors, people who'd been isolated and intimidated for months, now standing together in the morning sunlight, and felt something shift in the atmosphere. I call for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president, Jerry announced formally. Seconded, came Maria's voice immediately. Thirded, added Bob Richardson. Within seconds, the entire gathering was on their feet, voices joining in a chorus that grew stronger with each addition. Even Jake Morrison was nodding along, caught up in something bigger than his demolition contract. Karen looked around the crowd with growing desperation. You can't do this. I was elected legally. I have contracts, obligations, scheduled improvements. You have violated your oath of office, Jerry replied simply. You've exceeded your authority, ignored community input, and used your position to settle personal grievances. That's not leadership, Karen. That's tyranny. All in favor of the no confidence vote. David called out. 37 hands shot into the air like exclamation points against the morning sky. Even Emma raised a small hand, not entirely understanding the politics but certain about which side she was on. Motion carries, Jerry announced. Karen Martinez, you are hereby removed as president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, effective immediately. Karen stood frozen for a long moment, her clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield that had suddenly become use. David timed it later, when he was trying to understand how victory had transformed into catastrophe so quickly. 14 minutes of neighbors shaking hands, Emma finally diving into her birthday pool, and Jerry Patterson talking about healing. The community. 14 minutes of hope before reality came crashing down like a sledgehammer through glass. The first blow came via certified mail at 7:47 a.m., delivered by a postal worker who looked apologetic about ruining what was clearly a party. David signed for the thick envelope with growing dread, recognizing the law firm's letterhead before he'd even broken the seal. Pemberton, Chase and Associates, he read aloud, his voice cutting through the celebratory chatter. Notice of breach of contract and demand for immediate payment. The backyard fell silent except for Emma splashing and her delighted squeals. Oblivious to the legal bomb that had just detonated her birthday party, Jerry hurried over, his face grave. What does it say? David's hand shook as he read the formal language. The demolition contract was signed by Karen as HOA president. If we cancel now, we owe the full contract amount plus penalties. $12,400. Payable immediately. $12,000. Sarah's voice cracked. David, we don't have $12,000. It gets worse, David continued reading. If payment isn't received by noon today, they'll proceed with demolition and file liens against any HOA member who interfered with the contract. The mathematics of Karen's revenge were elegant in their cruelty. She'd trap them in a perfect legal snare, pay money they didn't have, or watch her destroy the pool anyway while bankrupting anyone who dared to oppose her. There's more mail coming, Margaret Patterson called from the front yard, her voice tight with worry. David jogged around the house to find 3 more delivery trucks lined up at his curb like harbingers of doom. FedEx, UPS, and another postal worker, all carrying packages addressed to various neighbors who'd attended the morning meeting. The second wave of legal documents hit like artillery fire. Maria Santos received a notice demanding removal of her non-compliant rose garden within 48 hours or faced daily fines of $500. Bob Richardson got a demand to restore his property line fence to regulation height at a cost of $3,200. Every person who'd raised their hand in the no-confidence vote found themselves suddenly facing thousands of dollars in fines, fees, and forced improvements. She planned this, Jerry said grimly, studying the cascade of legal papers. Every single one of these demands was prepared in advance. She knew we'd find the documents, knew we'd confront her, knew we'd vote her out. Then why didn't she stop us? David asked. Because this was always her endgame. Margaret's voice carried the bitter wisdom of someone who just realized they'd been outmaneuvered by a master. She wanted us to rebel. It gave her the excuse to destroy us all at once. David looked back toward his pool, where Emma was still playing with innocent joy, unaware that her birthday party was turning into her family's financial funeral. The irony was suffocating. They'd won the battle for democracy only to discover that Karen had turned democracy itself into a weapon. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Impressive display this morning. But chess is won by thinking ahead, not reacting. Check your mailbox. David ran to his mailbox with a sinking heart. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a copy of his mortgage statement with key numbers highlighted in red ink. Someone had done extensive research into his family's finances, calculating exactly how much pressure they could withstand before breaking. The message was clear. Karen knew precisely how to destroy him. David. Jake Morrison's voice called from the driveway. The demolition contractor looked genuinely distressed as he approached. Look, I'm sorry about all this. I tried calling the law firm, but they're saying the contract is ironclad. How long do we have? Jake checked his watch. 4 hours and 13 minutes. If the payment doesn't clear by noon, I have to start demolition. It's not personal, man. It's just business, David finished bitterly. I know. But as Jake walked back to his truck, David noticed something odd. The contractor kept glancing back at the house with an expression that looked less like resignation and more like guilt. Jake, David called after him. Can I ask you something? Sure. How long have you been doing demolition work? 15 years. Why? Ever have a contract like this before, where you're forced to destroy something perfectly legal because of HOA politics? Jake's discomfort was visible. No, I haven't. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Look, I'll give you some free advice. Check the contract details. All of them. Sometimes lawyers get clever with the fine print. After Jake left, David gathered the core group of neighbors in his living room. Emma had finally noticed the adult tension and retreated upstairs with Sarah, leaving the rebels to face their impending defeat. We need $12,400 in 4 hours, David said simply. Anyone have ideas? The silence stretched until Jerry cleared his throat. I have about $3,000 in savings. Margaret and I could. No. David cut him off. I'm not letting you bankrupt yourselves for my pool. It's not just your pool anymore, Maria Santos said quietly. It's about all of us. If Karen wins this, she'll know she can crush any opposition. She's already crushing us, Bob Richardson replied, waving his fence violation notice. Look at these fines. She's trying to force half the neighborhood to sell their homes. David stuttered, the legal documents spread across his coffee table like pieces of a puzzle that refused to make sense. Something nagged at him about Jake's parting advice. Check the contract details. All of them. Maria, you're a paralegal, right? Was. Before I retired. Look at this demolition contract. What do you see? Maria put on her reading glasses and examined the document with professional care. Her frown deepened as she read. This is unusual, she said finally. The payment structure is strange. Usually demolition contracts require partial payment upfront, with the balance due on completion. This one demands full payment before any work begins. Is that legal? Legal, yes, but highly unusual. It shifts all the financial risk to the client. Maria flipped through the pages. And look at this. There's a clause here that voids the contract if the demolition would violate any municipal codes or regulations. David felt a spark of hope. What kind of violations? Environmental protection, historical preservation, permit requirements. Maria's voice trailed off. David, when was this pool installed? 3 years ago. Why? Did you get city permits? Of course. Sarah made me get permits for everything. Electrical, plumbing, structural. We did it all by the book. Maria's eyes widened. Do you still have them? David rushed to his home office and returned with a folder thick with official documents. As Maria spread them across the table, her expression grew increasingly excited. David, look at this. Your pool installation required an environmental impact assessment because of the proximity to the storm drain system. The city classified it as a permanent water feature with integrated landscaping. So according to Municipal Code 47B, any permanent water feature connected to the storm system requires a separate demolition permit that takes a minimum of 10 business days to process. Karen's demolition contract violates city regulations. The room erupted in excited chatter, but David held up his hand for quiet. Wait, if the contract is invalid, why doesn't Jake know that? Because, Maria said with growing confidence, Karen's lawyers probably didn't tell him. They buried the municipal code violations in legal jargon, betting that a demolition contractor wouldn't know the specific environmental regulations. David grabbed his phone and called Jake Morrison. Jake, it's David Chen. I need to ask you something important. Did anyone explain the city permit requirements for demolishing a pool connected to the storm drain system? There was a long pause. What permit requirements? Municipal Code 47B, Environmental Impact Assessment. 10-day waiting period. Separate. Demolition permits. Son of a bitch. Jake's voice carried a mixture of anger and relief. They didn't tell me any of that. If I'd started demolition without proper permits, the city would have shut me down and fined me into bankruptcy. So the contract is void. Hell yes, it's void. I'm not risking my license for Karen Martinez's vendetta. Jake's voice grew stronger. David, I'm officially canceling this job. And I'm calling the law firm right now to tell them exactly why. As David hung up, the living room exploded in celebration. Jerry pumped his fist like he'd just hit a home run. Maria was laughing and crying simultaneously. Bob Richardson was already texting the good news to other neighbors. But David felt something cold settling in his stomach. This victory was too easy, too clean. Karen Martinez didn't make mistakes like this. His phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Well played. But the game isn't over. Check your evening news. K. David looked up at his celebrating neighbors and felt the weight of impending doom. Karen's revenge had layers they hadn't even discovered yet, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the faint sound of Emma singing happy birthday to herself by the pool, a sound that might not last much longer, because if David had learned anything about Karen Martinez, it was that she never fought just one battle at a time. While they'd been focused on, he was grilling hot dogs for Emma's belated birthday party, watching his neighbors celebrate their legal victory with the exhausted relief of soldiers who'd survived a battle, when Sarah came running from the house with her laptop clutched against her chest. David, you need to see this. Now. The evening news was already running the story. Channel 7's investigative reporter, Jennifer Walsh, stood in front of the Willowbrook Estates entrance sign with the practiced gravity of someone delivering a death sentence. Tonight at 6, an exclusive investigation into Willowbrook Estates, where Rogue Homeowners Association has been operating in violation of state and federal housing laws for over 2 years. David's blood turned to ice. Around him, the celebration died as neighbors gathered around Sarah's laptop screen, their faces reflecting the blue glow of their worst nightmare coming true. Our investigation began, Jennifer Walsh continued, when HOA President Karen Martinez brought us evidence of systematic corruption within the community's previous administration. The screen cut to Karen sitting in what appeared to be a professional studio, wearing a navy blazer and an expression of concerned civic duty. She looked like a whistleblower, not a tyrant. I discovered that the previous board had been approving construction projects without proper permits, collecting fees without proper documentation, and worst of all, putting residents at risk with substandard installations. David felt the world tilt sideways. Jerry Patterson grabbed his arm for support. She can't do this, Jerry whispered. She can't just lie on television. But Karen wasn't lying. She was telling a carefully curated version of the truth. The screen filled with official documents as Jennifer Walsh's voiceover continued the assassination. According to city records, dozens of home improvements in Willowbrook Estates were approved by the HOA without corresponding municipal permits. Pool installations, deck additions, fence modifications, all potentially dangerous violations of building codes. The documents were real. David recognized several of them from his own permit files. But the context was completely distorted, making legal improvements look like safety hazards. The financial irregularities are equally troubling, Jennifer Walsh continued. Former HOA President Gerald Patterson collected over $40,000 in architectural review fees without proper oversight or documentation. Jerry's face went white. Those were legitimate fees. We kept records of everything. Where are the records? David asked urgently. In the HOA office. In Karen's filing cabinets. The implication hit them like a physical blow. Karen controlled the evidence now. She could make the records disappear, alter them, or simply claim they never existed. On screen, Karen leaned forward with practiced sincerity. When I took office, I knew I had to act quickly to protect this community. We are talking about potential structural failures, environmental violations, insurance liability. The previous administration put every family at risk. What was your first priority? Jennifer Walsh asked. Safety. I immediately ordered inspections of the most dangerous installations, starting with unpermitted pools that could pose drowning hazards or foundation damage. The camera cut to aerial footage of David's backyard, his pool looking enormous and somehow sinister from above. Emma's pool toys floated on the surface like evidence of negligence. The Chen family's pool, Karen continued, was installed without proper city permits, without soil stability assessment, and without safety inspections. As HOA president, I had a legal obligation to protect the community. David's phone started, buzzing with calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Reporters, probably, drawn by the scent of a scandal. He turned off the phone, but the damage was spreading faster than he could contain it. Furthermore, Karen said, her voice dropping to convey deep concern, when I attempted to address these safety issues through proper channels, I was met with organized intimidation. This morning, dozens of residents surrounded my home, shouting threats and demanding I ignore safety regulations. The screen showed cell phone footage of the morning's gathering, but shot from an angle that made the peaceful assembly look like an angry mob. David could see himself in the center, gesturing emphatically while Emma played in the background. The optics were devastating. I feared for my safety, Karen concluded, but I won't be intimidated into compromising this community's welfare. The news segment ended with Jennifer Walsh promising a follow-up investigation into HOA corruption and a number for residents to report safety concerns. David's address flashed on screen for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for every vindictive neighbor and internet vigilante in the city to memorize it. The backyard fell silent except for the sound of Emma's birthday party music, still playing. From the portable speaker, cheerfully oblivious to the destruction raining down around it. She planned this from the beginning, Maria Santos said finally. Every document we found yesterday, every legal victory we celebrated, she wanted us to find them. She needed us to rebel so she could play the victim. But the permits, Bob Richardson protested. My pool permits are legitimate. The city approved everything. Doesn't matter, Jerry said bitterly. She's not claiming the permits are fake. She's claiming we got HOA approval without them, then got city permits afterward to cover our tracks. By the time anyone sorts out the timeline, we'll all be bankrupt from legal fees. David's mind raced through the implications. Karen had weaponized the truth itself, taking legitimate actions and reframing them as corruption. She'd turned their victory into evidence of their guilt. We have to fight this, Sarah said fiercely. We have documentation, witnesses, proof of everything. Do we? David asked quietly. Jerry, where did you keep the HOA meeting minutes? The approval records? Jerry's face went ashen. In the office. In the files Karen now controls. What about digital copies? The old board. We weren't very tech-savvy. Most of our records were physical documents. David felt the trap closing around them with mechanical precision. Karen had positioned herself as the keeper of evidence that she could now alter, destroy, or simply claim never existed. It was the perfect crime, stealing the past to destroy the present. His phone vibrated with a text from the unknown number. Check your email. K. David's personal email contained a single message from a law firm he'd never heard of. Notice of intent to file suit for property damage, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to defraud. The attached legal document was 37 pages of accusations that painted David as the ringleader of a criminal conspiracy to circumvent safety regulations and intimidate a public official. The potential damages exceeded $200,000. She's suing all of us, David announced, his voice hollow. Everyone who voted this morning. Everyone who's been fighting her. We are all named as co-conspirators. The gathering began to fracture as neighbors absorbed the reality of their situation. Some pulled out phones to call lawyers they couldn't afford. Others started making excuses about early mornings and sick children. Within minutes, David's backyard had emptied except for Jerry, Margaret, Maria, and his own family. Emma emerged from the house carrying her birthday cake, a small chocolate confection with 8 candles that Sarah had somehow managed to prepare despite the chaos. Daddy, are we still having my party? She asked innocently. David looked at his daughter, 8 years old, holding her birthday cake in a backyard that might not be theirs much longer, surrounded by adults whose lives were crumbling around her, and felt something crystallize in his chest. Yes, sweetheart. We are definitely having your party. He lit the candles on Emma's cake while his phone buzzed with increasingly frantic calls from reporters and lawyers. As his daughter made her birthday wish and blew out the flames, David made a decision that would change everything. "Jerry," he said quietly, "do you still have contacts at the school district?" "A few." "Why?" "Because Karen made one crucial mistake in her perfect plan." "What mistake?" David smiled for the first time since the news broadcast began. "She assumed I was just a desperate father trying to save his daughter's pool. She has no idea what I actually do for a living." Sarah looked at him with growing understanding. "David, you're not thinking. I'm a data forensic specialist for the county tax assessor's office," David continued. "I spend my days tracking financial irregularities and document fraud. And I have access to databases that Karen Martinez doesn't even know exist." Margaret Patterson leaned forward. "What kind of databases?" "Property records, permit histories, tax assessments, HOA filing documents, all cross-referenced and time-stamped, with digital signatures that can't be altered or deleted." David's voice grew stronger with each word. "Karen can control the paper trail, but she can't control the digital evidence. And I've just realized something that's going to destroy her." Jerry's eyes widened. "What?" "Her gazebo. The one she claims was grandfathered in by previous owners." David pulled out his phone and started typing rapidly. "I can check the exact installation date, the permit history, even the contractor payments. If I'm right about what I'm going to find." The phone screen filled with property records, tax, filings, and permit databases. David's fingers flew across the interface with professional precision while the others watched in growing amazement. "There," he said, "Finn.